The key turned up on a Thursday in late October, the kind of afternoon where the light quits early and the air carries the particular smell of wet leaves and cold coming. Nora Vásquez was cleaning out the storage unit her mother had rented for 11 years in a facility off Route 7, the kind of place with a corrugated metal door and a padlock that stuck in damp weather. Her mother, Cecilia, had been dead for 6 weeks. The storage unit was the last thing left to deal with. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Nora was 53 years old and had not cried yet. Not at the hospital, not at the funeral, not when she signed the papers releasing the body. She had moved through the weeks since with the efficient numbness of someone who had learned early that grief, if you gave it an opening, would take everything from you, and she had nothing left to give. She was a home health aide. She worked 40 hours a week and sometimes more. She drove a 2009 Civic with a heater that worked in one position only. She had $800 in a savings account she had not touched since putting it there 3 years ago as an emergency fund, because the emergencies kept coming and she kept deciding each one was not quite bad enough to justify taking the money. Her mother had left her nothing, or so the will said. A simple document, 2 pages, leaving the contents of the storage unit to Nora and everything else: the small house on Delancey Street, the bank accounts, the car to her brother Tomás. Nora was not surprised. Tomás had always been the one who mattered more. The storage unit held what you would expect from a woman who had lived carefully and kept things she could not explain holding on to. Cardboard boxes sealed with masking tape and labeled in her mother's handwriting: kitchen, winter things, papayas. A rolled rug with a broken pattern of red and blue diamonds. A wooden crucifix wrapped in a dish towel. A sewing machine in a soft case. A box of photographs Nora had not seen since childhood. Faces she could half remember, but not fully name. She worked through it methodically, the way she did everything, setting things into piles: donate, keep, discard, and not letting herself slow down over any single item too long. She was 3 boxes deep when she found the tin. It was a small tobacco tin, the kind her grandfather had used, dark red with a faded script on the lid. It had been tucked into the corner of a box labeled kitchen, underneath a set of dish towels folded into precise squares. She opened it expecting buttons, or maybe old stamps, the kinds of things her mother had accumulated and never organized. Inside the tin was a single key on a length of thin cord. Brass, old, with a long shaft and an ornate bow at the top, the kind of key you saw in photographs of old houses, the kind that fit a door you had to turn the knob and the key at the same time. She turned it over. On the bow, almost too small to see at first, letters had been engraved in a careful hand. Vásquez. Nora stood in the storage unit, holding the key for a long time without moving. Outside, a car pulled in and a man with a dolly wheeled past without looking at her. The fluorescent tube above her head buzzed and flickered once. She looked at the key again, the engraving, the deliberate quality of it, not scratched or stamped but cut in, letter by letter, as though someone had intended it to last. She had never seen this key before. She did not know what door it opened. She did not know why her mother had kept it in a tin of dish towels for 11 years in a storage unit that nobody was supposed to know about. She put it in her jacket pocket and drove home. The next morning, she called her brother. Tomás was 57 and lived 40 minutes north in a house he had bought with money borrowed from their mother a decade ago and never repaid. He had a good job, a management position at a distribution center, and a wife named Deborah who had the careful manners of a person who had decided not to like you but had agreed not to say so directly. Nora had always understood this about Deborah without being able to explain how she knew it. "I found something in the storage unit," Nora said. "A key, with our name on it." "What name?" Tomás said. "Vásquez, engraved on it." A pause. "What does it open?" "I don't know." "Did Mama ever mention anything to you? A key, a door, property somewhere?" Another pause, longer this time. "No," he said. "Why would she mention property to you and not to me?" "I didn't say she mentioned it to me. I said I found the key." "Maybe it's nothing. Old keys show up in storage units all the time. People collect them." "She didn't collect keys, Tomás." "Nora." His voice shifted to the tone she had heard her whole life. The one that said she was making something out of nothing, that she had always made something out of nothing, that this tendency of hers was a kind of defect. "Don't do this." There's nothing to find. Mama was careful with what she had. If there was something worth finding, she would have told me. Nora said nothing. Come to dinner Sunday, Tomás said. Deborah is making that chicken you like. I'll think about it, Nora said, and hung up. She went back to the storage unit that afternoon and spent 4 hours going through every box. She read every document, unfolded every piece of paper, shook out every envelope. She found nothing obvious, no deed, no title, no letter explaining the key. But in the box labeled Papa Yes, under a stack of her father's old union cards and pay stubs from the foundry where he had worked for 23 years, she found an address written on the back of a church. Bulletin. The address was for a property in a town 60 miles east, a place called Harwick. Below the address, in her father's handwriting, a single word, Gardata. Kept. Hidden. Saved. Her father had been dead for 18 years. She sat with the church bulletin in her hands and thought about her father, who had come from Oaxaca in 1971 with nothing and had built something careful and quiet out of the years that followed. He had worked the foundry, saved every week, spoken rarely about what he had come from or what he had left behind. She had inherited his quietness, or at least the appearance of it. Tomás had inherited the confidence. She photographed the address on her phone, put the bulletin in her bag, locked the storage unit, and went home. On Saturday morning, she drove to Harwick. The address led her to the east side of town, a neighborhood of narrow houses with small front yards, some of them well kept and some of them not, the kind of block where families had lived for 40 years and newer people were beginning to arrive. She parked on the street and looked at the house. Number 14, a 2-story frame house, white with green shutters, one of which had come loose and hung at an angle. The porch was intact. A maple in the front yard had dropped most of its leaves. The windows were intact but filmed with dust on the inside, and the curtains behind them, a pale color, were the kind that do not move even when the heat comes on, because no heat was coming on. The house was empty. Nora got out of her car and stood on the sidewalk. A woman raking leaves 3 houses down looked up once and went back to her raking. There was a lockbox on the front door, the old kind, a combination rather than electronic, and a notice from a property management company taped to the door below it. The notice had a phone number and the words property inquiry contact. She wrote down the number. Then she took the key from her jacket pocket and looked at it, and looked at the door and thought about what she was doing. She was standing on a sidewalk in a town 60 miles from home holding a key with her family name on it and looking at a house that was empty and had been empty for some time. And the most reasonable explanation was that there was no connection at all, that the key was to something else entirely, that her father's note was about something she would never understand. She walked up the front path anyway. The lockbox was on the door handle. The key she had was not a lockbox key. She stood on the porch and tried the front door first, out of habit or instinct, and the door did not move. She looked at the keyhole. Standard pin tumbler, newer, not a match. She stepped back and looked at the house. Then she walked around the left side. A gate and a chain-link fence. Unlocked, or the lock too rusted to function. She went through. The backyard was overgrown, a season of grass gone to seed, a bare vegetable garden, a clothesline with one wooden pin left on it. Along the back of the house, a storm cellar door, the old kind, set into the foundation at a low angle. 2 doors angled up from the ground with a hasp and a padlock between them. The padlock was old enough that the keyhole was the elongated shape of a skeleton-style key. She looked at the key in her hand. She fitted it into the lock. It turned. Nora stood there with the open padlock in her hand and did not move for a full minute. The cellar doors, when she pulled them up, were heavier than they looked, solid oak planks, swollen with years of moisture. They came up on hinges that complained but held. Below was a set of stone steps descending into darkness, and the smell that came up was not the smell of rot or standing water, but of dry stone and cool air, the smell of a place that had been sealed for a long time and maintained its own quiet climate inside the ceiling. She went down. The flashlight on her phone showed her rough stone walls, a packed earth floor, a low ceiling with exposed joists above. The cellar was the full footprint of the house, maybe 40 feet by 30, and it was not empty. Along the north wall, floor-to-ceiling wooden shelving, old but solid, the kind built to last rather than to look well. On the shelves, boxes not cardboard but wooden, the kind used for storage in the era before cardboard. Each one was sealed with a simple hasp. Each one had a small card slotted into a holder on the front, and on the card, handwriting she recognized. Her father's. She was 37 years old the last time she had seen her father's handwriting on anything new, and then she had not known it would be new for the last time, had not paid it the attention it deserved. Standing in the cellar of an empty house in a town 60 miles from her apartment, she looked at her father's handwriting on the small white cards and the wooden holders and felt the first thing she had felt in 6 weeks that was not numbness. She moved the flashlight slowly along the row of boxes. The cards read in his careful block letters, Certificates Land. Title Records Harwick. Correspondence Attorney March. Photographs. Papa S. Letters Do Not Destroy. And at the end of the row, in slightly larger letters, underlined twice, for Nora. She sat down on the bottom step and did not move for a while. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. She did not open anything that afternoon. She sat in the cellar for 20 minutes with her flashlight and her phone and her father's handwriting on the cards, and then she stood up, photographed every shelf and every card in sequence, and went back up the stone steps into the October afternoon. She closed the cellar doors. She replaced the padlock, which now only appeared to be locked since she had the key. She walked to her car and sat in it for a long time. She called the number on the property management notice. The woman who answered was named Sandy, efficient and unsurprised by the call the way people in property management are unsurprised by almost everything. She told Nora that the property at 14 Delancey East in Harwick had been in a holding status for the past 14 months, that the account was managed through a trust, and that any inquiries about the ownership structure needed to go through the firm of Reyes and Alderman in Harwick proper. What kind of trust? Nora asked. I'm not able to discuss that, Sandy said. Reyes and Alderman would be the contact. Nora wrote down the name and hung up. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the apartment she had rented for 11 years and looked at the ceiling and thought about her father, who had worked the foundry for 23 years and never once talked about owning property 60 miles from home. She thought about her mother, who had kept a key in a tin of dish towels for 11 years and left it to Nora in the only way that was available to a woman who apparently could not say it directly. She thought about the word guardada. Kept. Hidden. Saved. For whom? In the morning, she drove to Harwick again. The office of Reyes and Alderman was on the second floor of a building 2 blocks from the town square, the kind of firm that had been in the same office for decades based on the weight of the furniture and the quality of the carpet. The attorney who came out to meet her in the lobby was a man in his 60s named Vincent Alderman, the son of the original, with a careful face and the steady manner of someone who had handled difficult conversations long enough to be genuinely calm during them. She told him her name. His expression changed. Not dramatically, but she had worked in rooms with sick people and worried families long enough to read small shifts in the face with precision, and what she saw in his was recognition. Ms. Vásquez, he said. Come in. He brought her into his office, which was lined with files and had a window looking out at the street below. He sat across from her and opened a folder that had already been on the desk. She noted that. Already on the desk. I've been expecting someone from your family to come in, he said. Though I wasn't certain it would be you specifically, or when. Why not certain, she said. He looked at the folder. Because your father was not always sure you would be the one to find the key. He said Cecilia would keep it somewhere safe. He said it was the kind of thing that might take time. He paused. He said you were the one who paid attention to things. But he wasn't sure what would happen after he was gone. Nora kept her face still. He worked with you? He worked with my father originally, in 1988. He came back to me when my father retired. He was a client of this firm for 30 years. Alderman set a hand on the folder. I should tell you several things in the right order. They will be easier to receive that way. All right, she said. He told her. He told her in the careful, measured way of a man who had been holding information in trust for a very long time and understood that the receiving of it would require steadiness on both sides. He told her that her father, Ernesto Vásquez, had purchased the property at 14 Delancey East in Harwick in 1988 for $11,000 at a county tax sale, an abandoned house on a parcel that the previous owner had failed to pay taxes on for 8 years. He told her that the property had sat on a corner lot that included, at the time of purchase, an adjacent parcel that the county had not yet separated in its records, adding a full quarter-acre of land to the total footprint. He told her that Ernesto had paid the back taxes, cleared the title through a quiet title action that Alderman's father had filed in 1989, and held the property in a trust he had established specifically to ensure that the house and its contents would pass directly to Nora outside of the general estate, in a form that could not be contested by any other party. Outside the estate, Nora said. Completely separate, Alderman said. The trust was established before your father died. The house is not part of your mother's estate. It does not pass through probate. It passes directly to you as the named beneficiary of the trust. Nora looked at him for a moment. Tomás doesn't know about this. Your father was specific on that point, Alderman said. He said, and I will read this directly from his instruction letter. If you will allow me, he said. I have arranged Tomás's life in ways he does not understand and would not appreciate if he did. I have done the same for Nora, but for different reasons. Tomás does not need what I am leaving her. She does. He paused. I know which one of my children will use it well. Nora sat with that for a moment. The room was quiet except for the sound of someone walking in the office above them, footsteps moving from one side to the other. What is in the cellar? She said. Alderman opened the folder. In 1988, when your father purchased the property, the cellar had been sealed and its contents left in place by the previous owner, a man named Chester Harlow, who had inherited the house from his parents and had never, in 30 years of ownership, gone into it. When your father opened it, he found the original contents of the house's previous occupant, a woman named Rosa Figuero, who had lived in the house from 1921 until her death in 1957. He looked at the papers. Rosa Figuero had no living relatives at the time of her death. The house passed to the county, was sold at tax sale, and the contents of the cellar were simply left. What did she leave? That is more properly a question for the man I am going to introduce you to, Alderman said. He picked up his phone. His name is David Okoro. He is an estate appraiser who specializes in paper documents, fine art on paper, and historical materials. Your father retained him in 1991 to assess the contents of the cellar. He has continued to maintain a relationship with this firm. He paused, phone in hand. He lives in Harwick. He has been waiting for this call for some time. David Okoro arrived within the hour. He was a tall man in his 70s with a white beard and the unhurried movements of someone who had learned that the most significant things did not reward being rushed. He shook Nora's hand and looked at her with an assessment she understood was professional rather than personal, and sat down in the chair Alderman offered. Your father was a careful man, Okoro said. He did not say this as a pleasantry. He said it as a factual statement about a person he had known. He understood what he had found better than most people would have. He asked the right questions, and he did not proceed until he had answers. What did he find? Nora asked. Okoro opened his own folder. He had brought photographs, printed on plain paper, showing the cellar shelves and their contents. He laid them on the desk between them. Rosa Figuero came to the United States from Portugal in 1919, he said. She came with her husband, a man named Antonio Figuero, who was a painter. Not a famous painter not then, not now, but a serious one, who had trained in Lisbon and had been corresponding with artists in New York in the years before the war. They settled in Harwick because Antonio's cousin lived here, and because the rent was manageable. He set a finger on one of the photographs. Antonio died in 1928 of influenza. He was 41 years old. He left Rosa with the house and with everything he had produced in the 9 years he had lived in it. Nora looked at the photograph. The cellar shelves, the wooden boxes, the rows of flat cases she had not thought to look at closely when she was down there the day before. What did he produce? She asked. 47 canvases. 42 drawings on paper. Correspondence with 11 artists who went on to be considered significant figures of the American modernist period. And a series of 64 woodblock prints that document, with unusual detail, the daily life of immigrant communities in this part of Pennsylvania between 1919 and 1928. Okoro set another photograph on the desk. The prints, specifically, they have been in the wooden flat cases on the lower shelf since 1928. Rosa stored them the year Antonio died. She apparently could not bear to look at them and could not bring herself to destroy them. They have been in the cellar since then. What are they worth? Nora said. Okoro looked at her steadily. I completed my original assessment in 1991 and updated it twice since, once in 2004 and once in 2019. The market for American modernist prints has changed considerably in those 30 years. The complete woodblock series is the most significant piece of the collection. In 1991, I valued it conservatively at $90,000. By 2004, with increased scholarly interest in the period, that figure had risen to $240,000. My 2019 assessment, which reflected two comparable sales at auction partial series, not complete sets, placed the conservative value of the complete Figuero woodblock series at between $550,000 and $800,000, depending on buyer and venue. The room was very quiet. "There's more," Okoro said, without apology. The canvases. Antonio Figuero is not a household name, but he corresponded with artists who are. Two of his letters in the cellar were written to him by a painter whose retrospective sold out last year at a gallery in New York. Letters in the hand of significant artists, with provenance documentation, have their own value separate from the art. And three of the canvases, in my 2019 assessment, I identified as likely having been completed during a period when Figuero was in documented contact with that painter, which gives them an attribution context that matters to collectors. He set the folder closed. My total assessment of the cellar's contents in 2019 was between $900,000 and $1.4 million. Nora looked at the folder on the desk in front of her. She looked at the photograph of the cellar shelves. She thought about her father driving 60 miles to a county tax sale in 1988 and paying $11,000 for a house nobody wanted, and then opening the cellar and finding what was inside it, and going not to a dealer or an auction house, but to an attorney, and sitting down to build a structure that would carry what he had found safely across the years and landed in the right hands. Her hands. She thought about him at the foundry. 23 years of shift work. A lunch pail and steel-toed boots, and a back that ached from the poor floor and never quite stopped aching. She thought about the small house on Delancey Street that her mother had left to Tomás, the house her father had worked every year of his working life to keep. She thought about the word Gardeta, written on the back of a church bulletin under a stack of union cards. Saved. Not for himself. For her. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth once. Then she took a breath. "What do I need to do?" she said. Alderman was already turning to the next page of the folder. The first step was the title. The trust documentation was in order, but the property had been sitting in holding status because the trust's terms required a beneficiary to claim it in person, with identification, within a reasonable period of following the grantor's death or the death of the designated secondary guardian. Her mother's death had started that clock. Alderman had been monitoring the county records. The process of taking formal possession of the property and its contents would take 3 to 4 weeks, he told her. There were forms to file with the county recorder, a verification of the trust's standing with the probate court, not because the property was part of any probate, but because the trust had been established under the probate code, and the court required a simple confirmation that the transfer was being executed correctly. It was administrative. It would hold. Okoro would accompany her to the cellar on the following day to do a current condition assessment before anything was moved or opened. He wanted to see the state of the flat cases before he committed to any updated numbers. He said 30 years in a stone cellar could go either way depending on the drainage and the humidity, and he would not speculate until he had seen it himself. That afternoon, Nora drove back to the house on 14 Delancey East and sat in the car in front of it for a while. She looked at the loose shutter. She looked at the maple dropping its last leaves. She thought about Rosa Figuero living in this house for 36 years after her husband died, going into the kitchen every morning and the living room every evening, and never going into the cellar because the cellar held everything she had lost, and she had decided that the act of opening that door would cost her more than she could afford to spend. She had lived with it sealed. She had died with it sealed. And she had left no instructions and no family and no one to say what should happen to what was below. And Ernesto Vásquez had come along 49 years later, on a morning at a county tax sale, and had bought a house he had no obvious reason to buy, and had gone down the stone steps, and had understood what he was looking at. Nora wondered if he had stood at the bottom of the steps the way she had, if he had taken a breath the same way. She thought he probably had. The following morning, she was at the house at 8 o'clock. Okoro arrived at 8:15 with 2 large equipment cases, and the unhurried efficiency of a man who has been doing this for a long time and has stopped performing urgency for anyone's benefit. They went down the cellar steps together. Okoro spent 4 hours in the cellar. He worked with a small dehumidifier he brought from one of the cases, which he ran for 20 minutes before he touched anything, measuring the ambient moisture and pronouncing it acceptable, better than expected for the length of time the space had been closed. He opened the wooden boxes with a specific tool he had for the purpose, something between a knife and a spatula, working at the edges of each one without forcing anything. He removed the contents with cotton gloves, examined them under a loupe, made notes on a pad in a shorthand Nora could not read. He worked without narration. She sat on the bottom step and did not try to rush him. When he was done, he sat down across from her on a wooden crate and looked at his notes. "The flat cases are the concern," he said. "The canvases are in better shape than I had any right to expect. The correspondence is intact. The flat cases," he paused. "The prints." He looked at her. "Ms. Vásquez, I need to revise my 2019 numbers upward." She was quiet. "There was a sale at auction 8 months ago," he said. "A partial Figuero series, 11 prints, from a private collection in Connecticut. They sold for $340,000. 11 prints." He looked at his notes. "You have 64. Nora looked at the shelving. At the flat cases, each of them sealed. Each of them holding what Antonio Figuero had spent 9 years making in a house he had rented because the rent was manageable, in a town 60 miles from anywhere he had planned to be. "There is a professor at the university in Philadelphia," Okoro said, "who has been writing about Figuero for 12 years. She has been looking for the complete series for most of that time. It has been assumed lost." He paused. "It is not lost." "No," Nora said. "It is not." She called Tomás that night. She had thought about whether to call him at all, had sat with the question through dinner and through the first hour afterward, turning it over the way she turned difficult things over, looking for the angle where it made sense. She called him because he was her brother, because their father had known the difference between what Tomás needed and what Nora needed without making it a competition, and she understood now that she was capable of the same. She called him because not calling him would have been a kind of smallness she did not want to carry. She told him about the house. She told him about the cellar and the key and Alderman and Okoro and the trust. She told him what Okoro had said about the prince. When she finished, Tomás was quiet for a long time. "He never told me," he finally said. His voice had lost the management tone, the one that suggested she was misreading something. What she heard now was something she had not heard from her brother in many years. Ordinary surprise. Plain feeling. "He didn't tell me either," she said. "He left it for me to find. Why didn't he tell us?" She thought about Gardeta, about the trust document and the attorney and the 30 years of careful maintenance, about the fact that her father had bought the house with foundry wages and tax sale prices and had never once suggested to either of his children that there was anything in Harwick worth looking at. "Because he knew how people behave when they know about something valuable," she said. "He protected it the same way he protected everything he cared about. He kept it quiet until it could go where it needed to go." Tomás was silent again. "He said you didn't need it," she said, not unkindly. "He said it in the letter to Alderman. He said you had what you needed and Nora would need this." She heard her brother exhale. It was the kind of exhale that doesn't have a name, but carries a whole accounting inside it of things understood too late, of the particular way fathers know their children even when the children believe they are not being known. "He was right," Tomás said. They talked for another 20 minutes. She told him she did not plan to sell everything at once. She told him she was going to take her time and do it the way Okoro and Alderman recommended, which was methodically and with the right buyers and in the right sequence, and that she would be making decisions from stability rather than urgency. He did not argue with this. He did not suggest his own name for any part of the process. Before they hung up, he said, "Nora, when Deborah told me at the funeral that you didn't look sad, that was the wrong thing for her to say. I should have said something." "Yes," she said. "You should have. I'm sorry." She accepted it. Not effusively, not with a speech about forgiveness. Just accepted it, the way you accept something that was owed and has finally arrived. She called Alderman the next morning. She told him she was ready to file the paperwork. She also told him she wanted to do something for the house, because the house deserved something. She asked whether there was anything in the trust's terms that prevented her from putting money into the property. "There is nothing in the trust that prevents you from doing anything," Alderman said. The property is yours. You can do with it as you choose. I want to fix the shutter first, she said. And the porch. He laughed, a short, genuine sound. Your father would have said the same thing. The title transferred on a Wednesday in the third week of November. Nora signed the documents at Alderman's office, the county recorder's stamp going onto the deed with the weight of something that had been held in suspension for 30 years and was now, finally, settled. She drove to Harwick that afternoon. She parked in front of the house. She looked at the maple, bare now, and the loose shutter, and the porch that sagged in one corner. She had spoken to a contractor who had given her an estimate she could cover with the operational budget from the trust's small liquid holdings, which Alderman had managed conservatively and carefully over the years, adding up to just enough for exactly this kind of beginning. The professor in Philadelphia, whose name was Dr. Adiz Obi, had been contacted by Okoro and had driven to Harwick on a Saturday to see the cellar. She had stood in front of the flat cases for a long time without speaking. She had put on her own cotton gloves and opened the case at the end of the row and looked at the first print, and then had turned to Nora with an expression that Nora could only describe as the face of someone receiving news they had stopped allowing themselves to expect. I have been looking for these, Dr. Obi had said. I know, Nora said. My father found them first. Dr. Obi had stayed for 6 hours. She and Okoro had spoken in the careful shorthand of people who share a professional language, moving between the prints and the correspondence and the canvases with the focused attention of people for whom attention was the primary instrument. Before she left, she had asked Nora about her plans. Nora told her, carefully, in the right order, the way Alderman had told her the news that first morning. She was not selling everything. She was placing the complete woodblock series with a gallery in Philadelphia, a sale to be managed by Okoro, and the funds from that sale were going into a structure she was still designing. She was keeping 3 prints for herself. She was keeping the correspondence, because it was irreplaceable and should go to a university archive where scholars could read it. Dr. Obi had offered, without prompting, to facilitate the introduction to the archive at her institution. The canvases were a decision she was still making. There was no urgency. The cellar had held them for 97 years. They could wait another few months while she thought it through. The house, Dr. Obi had asked. The house I'm keeping, Nora said. Dr. Obi had looked at her for a moment. Your father bought this property for $11,000 in 1988. He did. He understood what was in it. He understood it well enough, Nora said. He understood what it was worth, and he understood that the worth could wait. And he built something that made sure it would reach someone who could decide what to do with it. She was standing in the front yard now, on the Wednesday the title transferred. The afternoon light was low and cold, the kind that turned everything the color of old wood and made even bare trees look deliberate. She had her hand on the front gate, the wrought iron one that needed paint, looking up at the house. She thought about her father at the foundry, the poor floor in the summer heat, the safety glasses, the burning smell of metal that she could still recall from the single time she had visited him at work, when she was 8 years old, and had stood in the doorway of the floor and watched him work and felt something she could not name then, but could name now. Pride. Yes, but more than pride. Witness. She had watched him do something difficult with care, and she had understood, in some wordless way that 8-year-olds understand things, that the care was the whole point. He had driven 60 miles to a county tax sale on a morning in 1988. He had seen something in a house that everyone else had written off. He had paid his $11,000, and he had gone down the stone steps, and he had understood what he was standing in front of. He had not rushed. He had not called an auction house or told a dealer. He had gone to an attorney, and he had sat down, and he had built a structure that would last. For her. She thought about him writing her name on the card in the wooden holder. For Nora. 2 words, block letters, underlined twice. The underline that said, not by accident. Not because she was the only one left. Because she was the one. She pushed open the gate. The contractor was coming Monday. The shutter would be first, then the porch, then a proper look at the foundation. Alderman had recommended a property manager for the day-to-day details while she was still in her apartment 40 miles away. She was not rushing that decision either. She would move when she was ready. Inside the front door, she walked through the empty rooms slowly. The contractor had told her the bones were good. The kitchen was intact. The windows needed glazing but not replacing. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom with the original tile, a small study with a window that looked out at the backyard and the clothesline with its one remaining wooden pin. She stood at that window and looked at the clothesline and thought about Rosa Figuero, who had come from Portugal in 1919 with a painter and had outlived him by 30 years in this house, going into the kitchen every morning and the living room every evening and never the cellar. She did not blame Rosa. You made the decisions that let you survive, and sometimes survival required the particular courage of not opening a door. Rosa had kept the cellar sealed and Ernesto had opened it, and Nora had walked down the stone steps with a flashlight, and now the flat cases were being prepared for transport to a gallery in Philadelphia, where Dr. Obi's catalog essay would be the introduction to a series of prints that 64 people had produced and that had been unseen for 97 years. Antonio Figuero had made something beautiful in 9 years and then died before he could know what it was worth. Rosa had kept it. Ernesto had found it. Nora had inherited it. Not the inheritance anyone would have predicted. Not the house on Delancey Street. Not the bank accounts. The other thing. The thing her father had known she was the right person to carry. She went back downstairs and through to the kitchen. She stood at the window her aunt had stood at, or whatever Rosa Figuero's equivalent of standing at a window and thinking was, and looked at the backyard going dark. The stone bird bath was still out there, or something like one, a flat stone on a concrete pedestal, probably original to the yard, covered in moss now and listing to one side. In summer, it would have water in it. In summer, birds would come. She had not let herself think too far ahead all week. She had focused on the next step and the step after that, the same way she moved through a long shift next task, then the one following, then the one after that. But standing in this kitchen in the fading November light, she let herself think forward for a moment. The gallery sale, which Okoro had estimated would take 6 to 8 months to place correctly, would generate enough to clear the $800 she had been protecting in her savings account back to a real number, and then considerably beyond. Enough to repair the house properly. Enough to consider leaving the home health job, or reducing her hours, or taking on a different kind of work. She had not let herself imagine what different work looked like, because imagining it had always felt like a kind of tempting of fate, like looking at something too directly would make it disappear. She was going to have to learn to look at it directly. She thought about what her father had written to Alderman. I know which one of my children will use it well. She thought about what it meant to be known that way by a person who was gone. Not flattered, not consoled, but known seen accurately, assigned correctly, trusted with something real on the basis of something true. She had spent her adult life being overlooked in the way that careful, quiet people are overlooked, not with cruelty, but with the particular thoughtlessness of people who mistake visible movement for actual effort. Her mother had done it. Tomás had done it. Marcus had done it. The man she had almost married at 38 before she had understood what his definition of her was. Her father had not done it. He had driven 60 miles to a county tax sale on a morning in 1988 and had found something extraordinary and had looked at it and thought of her. She was 23 years old in 1988. She was working at the laundry at the time, pressing shirts for the hotel linen service, because that was what was available and she had taken it. She had been doing what was available her entire life. Her father had been watching all of it, from the poor floor, and then from his chair after his back, made the poor floor impossible, and he had been building something that said, "You were always worth more than the available." She stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then she went back up the stairs one more time and looked at the study again. The small room with the window looking out at the clothesline. She stood in the doorway and thought about whether it was the right size for what she was beginning to picture. She thought it probably was. She thought she could put a desk at the window, because working at a window that looked at something instead of at a wall was a thing she had wanted for a long time and had talked herself out of wanting, because wanting things you did not have felt dangerous when you had very little room to lose. She was going to stop talking herself out of that. She went back down the stairs and stood in the front hall. The light was going. She had a drive ahead of her. She pulled the door shut behind her and locked it with the key, the brass key, her family's name in its bow. The key her mother had kept in a tin of dish towels for 11 years, patient and specific, waiting for the right person to open the right box and find it. She turned the key in the lock until she heard the bolt settle. She put the key in her jacket pocket. She walked to her car. She was not in a hurry. There was nothing she needed to outrun. She drove home through the last of the November light with the deed in the folder on the passenger seat and the key in her pocket and 64 woodblock prints in a cellar behind her, each one telling the story of a life made in a place no one had expected to make one, each one worth more than anyone in that life had ever been allowed to believe. Her father had known. He had always known. She put her hand on the key through the fabric of her jacket as she drove, not looking down, just feeling the weight of it, the small solid truth of it. The engraving she could trace from memory now, via with a Qtesque, a name, her name, put there on purpose, to be found on purpose, by the right person at the right time. She had found it. She was going to do right by it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.